So this is the second part of our talk on gender and sex on the screen, section 16. And so we'll move forward with that. We're taking a look at female portrayals over time. So kind of like how we've taken a look at how race was treated and African Americans were displayed over time. Now we're just looking more towards gender. And so we're taking a look at female portrayals. And the early images of women in the 50s and 60s on television, as you would have guessed, were portrayed women as domestic objects subjugated by men. So if you look at the old, I say like family type shows like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best and all these kind of shows, you had women that even like in the Dick Van Dyke Show of the early 50s or of the 50s, you had Mary Tyler Moore in that show, but she was a housewife, and that's what I mean by these domestic objects. They were only found in the home, right? And they were subjugated by men. So men kind of ruled the roost, told the women what needed to be done, and the woman was almost as much as a servant than really anything else. In the late 60s and 70s, portrayals of women started incorporating more feminist viewpoints. These females were demanding to be treated as equal to men. I mentioned Mary Tyler Moore earlier in the Dick Van Dyke Show, and the reason why I mentioned her specifically is because if you look at, as an actress, if you look at the two main roles that she had, first as this subjugated housewife, like I said in Dick Van Dyke, but then the second character that she is famous for is the actual Mary Tyler Moore Show, in which it's very much a feminist portrayal. Mary Tyler Moore works at a news station, and she is constantly struggling and fighting to be treated just as much as an equal to all the men that are there. And so that's this movement of feminism that's coming about, is that women can't be subjugated anymore. They have to be treated as equals. And so you have characters that are coming out, these characters who are becoming stronger and more vocal about what they need and want in life. If we look at more recent portrayals of females, we get more of a post-feminist kind of viewpoint. And so we move from feminism to post-feminism. What does that mean? Post-feminism is this kind of idea that, yes, women are equal, but women also are different than men. So in the past, when we talked about feminism, it was all about, well, I can do everything just like a man. I can do everything just like a man. Post-feminism comes about, and it's this attitude of, why, yes, I can do it like a man, but I choose to celebrate the feminine side of me also, right? So it's this idea that a woman can retain both her femininity and independence at the same time. She can be confident without being subjugated by a man. So we see shows like Sex and the City or movies like Bridget Jones's Diary. These romance comedies that kind of change a little bit and start portraying a woman as, yes, fiercely independent and very confident and capable, but also wanting to fulfill a role as a romantic partner or fulfill a role as a mother. So it's saying that, I can be your equal, but I can also do all the things that women are celebrated for. So critics claim that even in post-feminism, the male gaze still exists. That even when we moved into this realm of post-feminism, you still had a lot of control at the network or the film studio level. A lot of that control was by men, right? So it's kind of like how when we talked about blaxploitation movies, you had, you may have black actors, but they're they're performing in a movie that is, still written by white people, directed by white people, produced by white people. Some of that argument still existed with post-feminism, in that, yes, and I'll take Sex and the City as an example, if you've ever seen Sex and the City. Yes, you have these women who were fiercely independent, but they also craved having men in their lives. So whether it's the lead character always looking for Mr. Right, or if it was Kim Cattrall's character, who is, I think her name was Samantha, who's always looking to have sex with men, and is obsessed and infatuated with sex with men, different men. Well, when we get to those scenes, we still see a lot of nudity. We still see women treated as objects, so that, while Kim Cattrall is trying to sleep with these hot guys, I think a lot of the time the way the camera is showing things, it's treating Kim Cattrall as if she's the trophy, as though the man is lucky to get her. And so it's still very much treating as objects. And I was hesitating and pausing there because I was thinking of, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Pixels, which is about these invading video game aliens and this band of dorks who have to fight off these video game characters. There's this one shot or this one scene in it where the guy defeats something, and he is awarded for defeating this thing. He's awarded this woman from a video game, and so someone makes note, I think actually in the film, they were like, look what happened, you beat so-and-so, and you literally got a woman as a trophy. This woman who's supposed to come and serve your every need, and she's thought of exactly like a trophy. So that was just in my head when I was talking here. In 2010, there's a survey that looked at women in the news, and it found that only 24% of news subjects, or the interviewees, people being interviewed, were female. In other words, the majority of the time when people are being interviewed, it's a male that's being interviewed. Often, when a woman is interviewed, it is portrayed as kind of the ordinary person on the street. So just, running into everyday people. Versus when a man is on screen, they tend to treat the man as an expert. Now, this is in terms of interviewing people. If we're interviewing a female, it's because she's an ordinary person off the street. Interviewing a man, a lot of times it's viewed as being an expert interviewer. So, in broadcast news, women made up only 40% of the workforce, or rather, let me say it the correct way here. Women made up 40% of the workforce, only 18% of news directors. So, what we're saying is that if we look at the actual working journalists, while it's not equal, it's getting closer at 40%, but there's only 18% of women that are actually serving in these kind of agenda-setting roles, these gatekeeper roles. So, why does the news at night seem so heavily male in terms of how they tell their stories? Well, that's because there's primarily men who are serving as the news directors. Women are more likely than not to be given stereotypical roles still today in primetime TV. So we still see very kind of subjugated, backseat kind of characters. Now things are changing with that, but you still see a lot of that stereotype in existence. So the last thing we'll talk about is looking at sex in terms of going beyond straight out heterosexuality. So the assumption on television is that characters are heterosexual, but that's not true all the time, and we're seeing more and more portrayals of alternative sexual orientations other than heterosexual. And I don't mean to frame those things as being alternative. It's just, if we look at the majority of relationships being heterosexual, that's how I'm framing that. So one thing is, I guess, to call it minority sexualities. I'm not sure what the term is there. But early media portrayed homosexuals most definitely in a bad light. A lot of times they were portrayed as insane, as criminal deviants that should not or could not be trusted. So you had these characters that sometimes, even in the early portrayals, they wouldn't come out as being labeled homosexuals, but it was implied, and they were often in a villainous role. If we look at how that shifts over time, I would say by the end of the century, by the late 1900s or the 1990s, even at perhaps the turn of the century, you had homosexuals that were being treated largely at that time as comic misfits. The gay best friend, or the overly flamboyant homosexual. But they were most definitely looked at as more comic or comedic figures. You look at Will and Grace, or any show really that used this kind of stereotype as gay best friend, and usually that would be done in a comic role. So we see gay best friend. We see in the media where bisexuals are treated as manipulators, people that can't be trusted because they love both men and women. And so they're treated as if they're always playing a game with people. You look at, I don't know if it's Fatal Attraction or Basic Instinct, but it may be Fatal Attraction. But there's one movie that has Sharon Stone in it who plays a bisexual, and definitely that portrayal is one of a manipulator. The other thing that we're often shown is lipstick lesbians, is a phrase. And so it's lesbian characters, but lesbian characters that are being portrayed very much still through the male gaze, right? So it's two women who look like models that are lesbian, and guys, straight guys get off on that. And the term that's been used before is lipstick lesbians, as opposed to, just common people in appearance. But it seems, especially if you look at pornography, that the lesbian relationships are definitely framed with this male gaze to make these women look very voluptuous, very, very appealing to straight men, but engaging in lesbian sex. And then kind of ending with this point that I think rings very true. As long as sexuality of people, so whether they be lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer, whatever, as long as their sexuality reinforces patriarchal hegemony, they're safe. So, if we look at Will and Grace, there's nothing about Jack in that show that threatens masculinity. He's not seen as a masculine character. He's seen as a feminine character. Even Will is not really seen as a masculine character. He's a very wears his emotions on his sleeve, and he's not your typical kind of rough, tough, gruff guy as far as the character that's being portrayed. So, neither of those things challenge patriarchy or the fact that the world is man or father centered. Um, but as long as that's happening, that's fine. But when an issue takes front stage and it counters the public's accepted roles for sexuality, that's when you're going to get controversy, right? So if you look at, let's say, Ellen, um, and in particular, if we look at the first show that Ellen had, and I think that might have been on ABC, but I'm not sure. But she had a sitcom in the '90s, and it was a well received sitcom. She was a bookstore owner, I remember, and it was getting decent ratings, decent enough that it was getting renewed season after season. And then Ellen herself, as a comedian, as a person, comes out of the closet and decides that she's going to do the same with her character on the show. The character on the show has never come out and said that she was gay. But you don't really ever see the main character in that show. You don't see Ellen's character involved in any kind of relationships, really. And then there's this point in the series where she starts falling in love with this other female. And it culminates eventually in Ellen saying, I love you. And in the comedic sense that it is, she says it and the entire room, the entire place hears her say it. And so, when she comes out, she literally comes out to everyone on the show. Well, it wasn't getting renewed after that. The subject matter changed a little bit. It started challenging society with its portrayal of Ellen, and before long the show was canceled. So we see that. Rosie O'Donnell, a lot of people claimed that it was just fine as long as she wasn't hitting us in the face with her sexuality, being a lesbian. But pardon me. But when she started injecting that more and more and more into her daily talk show, then people said, well, this is a little too much. It's challenging society a little too much. One of the biggest things is going to be Brokeback Mountain. When Brokeback Mountain comes out, we have a movie that takes very masculine, stereotypical characters, ranch hand cowboys, that are driving a team of livestock from point A to point B. And it's kind of like a seasonal job where these cowboys come together once a year to do this run. And then we see that these two ranch hand cowboys actually have fallen in love with one another. And the movie really is not about gay cowboys as much as it's about these two men who have trouble coming to terms with the fact that they love one another and that they're gay. They both have families, traditional husband-wife families that they're in relationships, with their dads, their husbands. But then they come together to do this job, this seasonal job every year, and that's when they're at their happiest, when they're with one another. Now that, if you think about challenging patriarchy, that just challenges patriarchy as much as you can do, right? A husband and a dad who's with his family, that's the patriarchy. He's the head of that family. Married to a female, raising kids. But then he goes off and shows that he's in love with a man, and shows that he's really obsessed with that love. That's a deep, passionate love that he has. that disturbs patriarchy. And so it's not a huge surprise to see why there was so much controversy with that movie, right? So that's going to wrap it up for us today. I will see you in class. Everyone have a good day.